I hesitated to cover Jefferson Airplane because they are particularly cringy to me. Maybe because Grace Slick is a crass, gross woman, and I kind of categorize her along with Bette Midler, Janis Joplin, Courtney Love, Miley Cyrus, Tina Turner, and Joni Mitchell. I guess Joni Mitchell is just gross. One of her songs was featured on the credits of the movie Hereditary about summoning a demon. And probably some of those that I just listed aren't even women. Now that I think about it, who really knows? But I decided to cover Jefferson Airplane anyway for several reasons, mainly because they were a Tavistock band, a Tavistock creation, and part of the Tavistock agenda was to promote Pharmakia, Wormwood, and I'm associating that to the end times. The White Rabbit lyrics refer to Worm and Wormwood, and Rolling Stone added Somebody to Love and White Rabbit to their list of top 500 songs of all time, even though those songs would have made my list of the worst songs of all time. So here on this White Rabbit tribute album, you see Yalda Boeth, and you can barely see him, but he's on the right, a man with a donkey head. And that's the Greco-Roman depiction of the Egyptian demon Set. And see, it's the same god. That's him. So, the counterculture, Beat Generation, psychedelics or pharmakia, communal societies, and the summer of love were Tavistock creations correlated with the politics of the time, but alongside the Vietnam War, and not necessarily in juxtaposition, but accompanying it. So that's problem, reaction, solution. Isn't it ironic that the supposed artists of the time had military intelligence parents, as illustrated by Dave McGowan in his book, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon? And just prior, Ken Kesey of the CIA started an experiment to advocate for LSD in the late 50s. Then Timothy Leary, the Harvard professor, became a major advocate for the recreational use of psychedelic drugs. And so much propaganda happened to target young people to identify as hippies and take interest in ancient pagan religions such as Buddhism and Hinduism, all associated with pharmakia. The Beatles promoted that also, and they were also Tavistock. And that culture is still a phenomenon to this day with its branding. Peace signs, which is an upside-down broken cross, tie-dye, VW vans, all that. That symbolism was witchcraft, and it worked so well that it lingers to this day. So this one that I'm showing now looks kind of innocent, but this is also symbolism associated with the hippie movement. Lotus, Ankh, Flower of Life, Tree of Life, Pentacle. It's a little more witchy, I would say. But I noticed that many of the supposed phenomena identified with various cultural eras involve pharmakia. And that's a very disturbing pattern. Even COVID with the crown virus vipers and the accompanying opioid crisis. That defined an era. In the World War I era, England associated poppies with the fallen, which is a double entendre, and I've done videos about that. The poppies were then featured in The Wizard of Oz, released in 1939 at the break of World War II. And that movie was based on books by Frank Baum, the Theosophist, who published those books in the 1800s. And TikTok, the name, came from those books, spelled exactly the same way. And TikTok in that book was a type of mobile device technology. So on my video, Pharmakia and Sorcery, I talked about the lotus as a symbol for Pharmakia. And oh, what do you see? It's here. And a subscriber reminded me that Trump gave the Pope a lotus and publicized that gift during his first term. And the article I found says, POTUS loves the lotus. So they're always trying to get pharmakia into us in some form or another. And in the end, according to Revelation, they will somehow get it into a third of the population by hook or crook. Wormwood. Back to Jefferson Airplane. They formed in San Francisco Bay Area, but they were promoted in England and elsewhere. In the U.S., they got their start in a club called The Matrix. It says The Matrix was a favorite haunt of gonzo journalist Hunter S. Thompson in the late 60s, and it was mentioned in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. The Matrix Club was important in the formative years of San Francisco rock music, featuring Jefferson Airplane, but also The Doors, The Grateful Dead, Howlin' Wolf, Steppenwolf, The Velvet Underground, Santana, and a band called The New Age, among others. It says that the early years of The Matrix, there was a huge mural of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that members of Jefferson Airplane painted before the club first opened. On another wall, there was hieroglyphics, and here they are, photographed with hieroglyphics in the background, and notice the one-eye symbolism with the guy in the front and also Grace Slick behind him in the middle. And what's up with this guy with the freakishly large hands, the guy on the left that's got his hand on his knee? That's Jorma Kaukonen, and his father worked for the State Department abroad. So even after Jefferson Airplane broke up, their witch, Grace Slick, was promoted. And I would cringe anytime her songs were played. You know, we built this city on rock and roll and nothing's going to stop us now. Were probably 2 of the worst songs I've ever heard, but promoted heavily on the radio and in other propaganda. And why? Because they work for the club to promote pharmakia and the socialist political movement. The original band's name was Great Society. The reason it was named Great Society is because Great Society was a Fabian socialist political agenda promoted by Lyndon Johnson, who was president at the time after the sacrifice of JFK. And all the same things that are pushed so hard now were part of that movement, which is basically just global government or global communism. No surprise that Lyndon Johnson was a lieutenant commander in the U.S. Navy and promoted the Vietnam War. Jim Morrison's father, Captain George Morrison, commanded the American forces in the Gulf of Tonkin, and in the aftermath, President Lyndon Johnson ordered airstrikes against North Vietnam, which allowed him to continue military operations without declaring war. So, is it any wonder that Great Society, the former name of Jefferson Airplane's band, was promoted in the same club as the Doors? So Johnson was also famous for pushing NASA's Apollo program. John Steinbeck, the occult author of East of Eden, is photographed here with Lyndon Johnson. The other occult author of Jaws, Peter Benchley, who was from New England, elite literary and naval family. He was a speechwriter for Lyndon Johnson. And Lyndon Johnson's daughters, granddaughters, and great-granddaughters all attended Camp Mystic, which they recently flooded. So what I'm trying to show is that Jefferson Airplane, along with other Tavistock-promoted bands and media, are an example of the correlation between pharmakia and sorcery, the Fabian socialist political movement, which is a precursor to global governance, aka communism, war, NASA, and the space program Apollo, named after the angel of the bottomless pit and the apocalypse. So that's quite a combination, but yes, it is all related. And not to judge or preach, because I used to do drugs, but if you're still doing drugs and drinking, it's time to stop. Especially since they're putting all kind of extra pharmakia in things like weed nowadays. And some of these drugs are subtle, but they change your mind and spirit and intentions. And since it's subtle, you think that the thoughts and desires are your own, but trust me, they are not. I was a completely different person when I was using, mostly morality-wise. I still worked and took care of my family and my home, but what slipped were my morals, and that was good enough for the enemy. And now they try to put people on pharmakia for everything, especially young people and children, and that's a huge definition of current culture. Oh, she's sad. She needs a pill for that. He's mad a lot of times, so he needs a pill for that. Anxiety, here's a pill. Can't sleep, here's a pill. Grieving, here's a pill. To the point that people are not experiencing normal human emotions anymore, and people don't learn coping skills, and they don't turn to Jesus. Be sober. This is what God commands. Be sober and alert and watch. Because your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Thanks for listening.